Today is a great day to talk about the research gap in female pelvic medicine. Here's just one example. This Forbes article with Dr. Jill Kraft says about 16% of women have chronic vulvar pain. Another word for chronic vulvar pain is vulvodynia. Vulva means vulva, and dynia is Greek for pain. It's an umbrella diagnosis. It's a diagnosis of exclusion. Prostatitis is also an umbrella diagnosis of exclusion to refer to chronic pain that may or may not be a bacterial origin, that may or may not include inflammation in males. And it occurs in about 10 to 15% of the male population. So these two diagnoses are both umbrella terms that can be pretty general and vague and refer to a lot of different actual specific causes of pain. But the main difference between them, because they affect around the same amount of the population, is that there is 200 times the research on prostatitis if you do a search for that term on pubmed.gov versus vulvodynia. So vulvodynia, back a year ago when I did this search, has 1,099 articles, and prostatitis had 275,127 articles on it. 200 times more journal articles. Let that sink in. For the same type of condition, the same type of label that affects the same percentage of people. Now, I actually redid the search today because my last time was like a really long time ago, and there are 30 more articles mentioning vulvodynia than there were when I did that search last time. There are 5,428 more articles since that last search I did mentioning prostatitis on the same database. That is around 180 times more journal articles mentioning those terms. So we'd like to think that this bias is a historical thing and that there's just, in the past decades, 200 times more interest in researching male chronic pelvic pain. Even in the last year, there is that same, nearly the same rate of investment and research more for prostatitis than there is for vulvodynia. And it's like, we already have 200,000 articles on this. We really need 5,000 more, and we still haven't figured this issue out. And look at vulvodynia. We have less than 2,000 articles talking about it. And what's really problematic about this was highlighted this week in a post by this doctor, Jocelyn Fitzgerald, about how women's conditions in general are just called syndromes and then not researched. So our symptoms are then labeled with these not real diagnoses where the label gets the word syndrome put in it, or it's just vulva pain, vulvodynia, or interstitial cystitis / painful bladder syndrome, or even pudendal neuralgia, which affects all genders, is just a description of where it hurts. And she straight up says that syndrome is the new hysteria and that syndromes aren't worth much in medical billing codes or grant applications. And the thing all these diagnoses have in common is that they don't, this is the Merriam-Webster dictionary definitions of diagnosis, and one of them is investigation, number 2, or analysis of the cause or nature of a condition, situation, or problem. So the cause is another dictionary. It says examination of the nature and circumstances of a diseased condition. So again, it's not just labeling where it hurts. That there isn't a definition of diagnosis that is just, oh, we just want to say where it hurts, the location of the problem. And yet for so many of these conditions that primarily impact women and female bodies, that is what we get. We get a label that describes the location and gives no indication of the cause of the problem or pain. And then we're given that as a diagnosis, and then that justifies doctors then saying, we can't help you. That's it, you just got this syndrome now and you have to go live that way. And then paradoxically, the absence of the existence of research and the absence of the existence of thorough diagnostic testing for these nebulous syndromes and conditions, that's used as justification that it's all in your head and that it's psychogenic. That's the thing that makes the least amount of sense about all of this. Logically, the doctors and the people pushing the mind-body stuff should be making a caveat for illnesses that don't have medical research behind them. Because how are you going to rule out the physiological and structural causes if there isn't any infrastructure to do that? If doctors aren't educated on what those could possibly be, and so they slap on a syndrome after they've ruled out just a handful of very blatant infections with tests that have been proven to not be very specific. So this is just for erectile dysfunction, and they first use a penile Doppler ultrasound using high frequency sound waves to make sure that it's not, you might have a physiological or psychological cause. They want to rule it out and make sure. There's also the bulbocavernous muscle reflex test, a cavernosometry, I don't know how to say that word, cavernosometry, and fluids injected to measure vascular pressure, penile biopsy something, and a snap gauge. So the point is, all these tests for penile health, they don't exist for vulvas, they don't exist for clitorises. I have had clitoral pain for 4 years and I've never gotten an ultrasound. I have messaged dozens of people around the US, where can I get a clitoral ultrasound? No one can answer me. Maybe I have a problem with my bulbar cavernosus muscle. There's no reflex test for me. Maybe I have vascular nerve damage, but there's no cavernosometry test, fluid injected into my pelvis to measure my vascular pressure. This is just for one condition, and there are no tests like any of this for any vulvar pain condition. I have damage to my peripheral nerves. This is a list of different types of tests that are done for peripheral nerve damage. I have never had a single test like this ordered by, I've seen 50 doctors for my condition, and no one's ever tried to do any testing for my health, for my peripheral nerve health. So these tests exist, they just don't exist for female pelvises or female genitalia. This is from an EVI microbiome testing company email. It just says, we weren't required to be included in U.S. clinical trials until '93, and women are more likely to be ignored in the ER and at the doctor's office, and it takes 4 years longer than men to receive a diagnosis for the same disease. And there's other books that are written on this gender bias in medicine. There's a lot of other sources for like tons of horrifying statistics. But where it's really important to keep these facts in mind is right now in our current cultural climate of attaching psychology to the development of chronic pain and illness. This is from the same Time magazine article, and it's people like Dr. Gabor Mate are the ones that are really pushing this. He's got YouTube videos saying the same thing, basically that women are the primary sufferers of chronic conditions and autoimmune disease and all these horrible things, and that he says that cannot be explained by anything other than the fact that we repress our emotions and society rewards us for being agreeable, etc., and that's why we're sick. Now, there may be some truth to some of that, and I'm sure it's not healthy to repress our emotions, and I'm sure our societal roles do not have positive effects on our health, and we can criticize them, but they are clearly go back to the beginning of this video, 200 times more research on the male prostate than the vulva is one major reason why we are sicker. Taking 4 years longer to get diagnosed with the same disease is why we might be more likely to die after a heart attack. Getting ignored for our pain when we're literally in the ER is why we have these problems. Right now, people are ignoring the actual gender research gap, the gender bias in medicine, and they're blaming the psychosocial factors on women and our bodies, and not on the people that are failing to research our illnesses, failing to fund research on our illnesses, and failing to believe us when we come to them and say we have illnesses.